Hi, everybody. Welcome to How to Stand Out, Internships, Interviews, and in the Cyber Community. I'm Emily Calandranis, and we're so excited to have you join us today. Please introduce yourselves in the comments. Where are you watching us from? Say hi to our wonderful presenters, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. Today's event is going to be recorded, so if by chance you come in a little bit late or you have to leave early, you will be sent a link to watch the rewatch post-event. So don't worry, we'll make sure that you have a link to be able to watch it at your convenience. So today we have three incredible presenters and people that you know very well in the NCL community and through Cyber Skyline. We have Franz Payer, who will be sharing about the NCL Scouting Report, as well as Jasmine Jackson from the NCL board and the founder of TATP. She's going to be going over some passion projects. And then, of course, we have Tristan Mesner, who's going to be going over some GitHub techniques. And of course, he's one of the engineers from Cyber Skyline. Once again, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We will be waiting towards the end of the event to go over some Q&A, but also we are going to be chatting as the speakers are going in and out. So once again, ask questions and feel free to interact with each other, and we are thrilled to have you join us. So without further ado, and to give as much time as possible to our presenters, we're going to go ahead and start off with Franz Payer. Franz Payer is the CEO of Cyber Skyline, and he is going to be talking about the NCL Scouting Report. Hey, Franz.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Em, for the introduction. Excited to be here today and hopefully answer a lot of your questions about, what can you do to make yourself stand out, help you get an internship or a job. And this is definitely something that I know a lot of people have been just looking through the chat, eager to hear. So I am now sharing a copy of what the NCL Scouting Report looks like. This is the individual game scouting report. If you've participated in both the individual and the team game, you'll also get another one for the team game. Most people, for the purposes of putting things on their resume, will typically highlight their individual game scouting report because that's just solely them. I'm going to cover kind of an overview of what you will find in the scouting report, and then also how you can use the scouting report to present yourself professionally. So just going through right now, the first page here in their sample scouting report, it just has some highlights about kind of the information about how many people were participating, what the competition involved. This is kind of mainly there for recruiters if you're sending them a copy of it, and just gives them some context for what this was. And then you can also see here, based on your performance within the NCL, you can get continuing education units from CompTIA. So if you already have your certification, you can use this to help towards your renewal. If you go to our website, there's actually a table there that kind of shows you how many different credits you can get from your participation in NCL. And then at the very bottom here, this is kind of showing out your highlights here. So your top categories and your ranking as well. Further into this document, what you will see is the detailed breakdown. So starting with how did you perform in each of these different categories, and then when you go into each category, you will be able to see the different questions, the different challenges within those categories, and also a description of what that involved. So using this example here with this page with the log analysis, you can see here we have our ranking. This is 285 out of about 6,500 people. Generally, what I recommend, because there are so many people that participate in NCL, it's typically best to indicate your performance based on the percentile ranking rather than the raw rank. You can imagine you have thousands of people. If you say, oh, I scored 200, 300, 400, that might not sound the most impressive, but when you put that in context with the thousands and thousands of people who participate in NCL, having that percentile ranking there will better represent how well you actually performed, because I think a lot of times people might not recognize how much of an achievement that is when you just kind of give them the raw ranking. Now, looking through this in more detail, in addition to the ranking in the percentile, we have our score, you've got your accuracy, your completion, as well as on the right side, the top nice work roles. So something that I highly recommend for players in NCL when they get their scouting report, take a look at the different categories and how well you performed in each category and the nice work roles there. That can help you identify what jobs you might want to consider if you're still not sure yet about what specific career you want within cybersecurity. So these are the nice work roles. They're more of the generic job titles there. I would recommend kind of looking at those specific work roles if you're interested, and you can find more examples of the job titles that specific companies might be using, because these are the generic ones, and many companies will sometimes have different names for some of these jobs. And so you'll want to get a better understanding of that as well. Within each of these questions, you will have that description there. I would highly recommend that you take a look at the different challenges that you work through and the descriptions that they have here. Particularly what you want to keep an eye out for is some of the highlights that you felt during the competition. What were some of these challenges that were very difficult for you to work through, and then you finally got it and you felt that big sense of accomplishment? Those are going to be some really good examples on the scouting report for you to talk about during an interview. And the descriptions here might help give you an understanding of how to describe what you did. The really important thing is you want to be using the language and the keywords that the recruiters might be looking for and the hiring managers might be looking for. So you want to make sure that it's being described in a technical fashion, but not so technical that a recruiter who might not know all the specifics, they will still be able to understand what it is that you actually achieved. And so looking at this example with intrusion detection, it says analyze an IDS log to identify indicators of compromise and attack signatures. This kind of provides a blend where a recruiter is being able to understand that, okay, you're analyzing log files to find indicators of compromise. That's probably going to match some of the keywords that they have on their job description for like a SOC analyst. So they might be looking for someone who can use a tool like Splunk to analyze logs and find indicators of compromise. You kind of match those keywords there. And then if a hiring manager is reading this, they are getting a little bit more than just keyword matching, right? They're getting a technical description there of like, okay, you're looking at specifically IDS logs, not just any sort of generic log. You're looking for those indicators of compromise and attack signatures. That will give them enough context whether they can ask some good follow-up questions to that, right? They can start asking about your thought process. What tools did you use? How did you solve it? That will actually lead to a productive line of questions in your interview that will really show your ability. That gives you the opportunity to really speak to what you're able to accomplish. So highly recommend picking out a couple of these as kind of the key tasks that would be good to describe during an interview. So this continues with all the different categories within NCL. Something that I also recommend as you're going through your report here is to really focus on your areas of expertise. NCL covers a wide range of different skill sets, and you might be more focused on one particular skill set. So you can see in this sample here, there was not much done in the web application category, right? And they were a lot more focused in, say, log analysis or in scanning and reconnaissance. And so you do not have to show your overall ranking, especially, or your overall percentile, especially if you had a much stronger percentile within a particular category. So looking back at this first page, it shows your top categories: scanning 98th percentile, log analysis 96th, enumeration exploitation 96th. You can kind of highlight those if maybe your overall percentile is 70th percentile or 80th percentile. If you are looking for specifically a SOC analyst role, specifically highlighting your log analysis percentile might be more important than your overall percentile. So that's something to keep in mind. When you actually go and want to use your scouting report on your resume. The big thing I would recommend is take the high level of the performance that you want to advertise. That might be your overall percentile, or it might be the percentile within a specific category, and describe it as kind of like your achievement there. You can also describe it as an extracurricular. And then you can provide a link to the full scouting report. You can see in the bottom right, there's a placeholder for that, but in your copy of your scouting report, it will provide an online copy that the recruiter can go look at. That way they can kind of investigate that further when they see on your resume, and they might not be sure what exactly that is. They can get the additional details. More important, though, than specifically putting your percentile or your ranking is how you describe that experience. So what I recommend to everyone when they're putting together the resume, put yourself in the mind of the recruiter and what they are looking for, right? So you want to present yourself in the way that they are most likely to resonate with. The context for the recruiter here is that they are typically going through hundreds and hundreds of resumes. They're typically, what they're doing is they're spending maybe 5 to 10 seconds on a particular resume, and then deciding whether or not this is interesting enough to look into further. Because there are so many. There's kind of that initial screen where they're like, is this person not a good fit whatsoever? Skip right away, or are they interesting? And then typically once they kind of identify your resume as being interesting, then they'll do a more in-depth analysis of the resume. And what that means is that you need to capture their attention in that quick, 5 seconds or so for that deeper consideration. So oftentimes, if you just put down your performance metric and that is all, that becomes very difficult for them to identify you as someone to look into further, because think about how many other people applying for the same job are also going to put, hey, this is my ranking in NCL, or my ranking in another CTF, or like they are top whatever percent and try hack me. A lot of people are going to be putting those types of metrics there. And from the recruiter's perspective, they can start kind of looking the same, and they can start blending together a little bit, right? Like, what's the difference between someone who's, top 1% versus top 2% versus top 3%? Those all kind of start to feel a little bit like the same. So what I highly recommend is write, just like you would for job experience, write 1 or 2 sentences kind of highlighting a particular accomplishment or particular skill that you can demonstrate that will be relevant to the job. So let's go back to the example that you are applying for a SOC analyst job and you're looking at log analysis here. If you're taking that intrusion detection challenge, what you could say is list National Cyber League on your resume, put your, top 5%, or top 4%, that's what you get from the 96th national percentile ranking. And then say, was able to identify indicators of compromise using IDS logs. And if you were using Splunk, and maybe the job description mentioned Splunk, maybe you can say that I use Splunk to go and do this. That way, when the recruiter is looking through the resume, they can not only see that you participated in NCL and see your performance, but then they can go right next to it. And when they're wondering, what does that mean actually? Then they can read the description and it says, oh, I use Splunk to analyze IDS logs. And like, oh, perfect. I'm looking for someone who knows how to do that. And especially if you don't have prior job experience, the case with a lot of students who are looking for their internship or their first job, having that written as something that you've been able to do is really going to help the recruiter understand, okay, this is someone who's done something that is actually relevant to the job that I'm hiring for. And so that's really, really important. It's much more important to actually describe what it is that you did that is relevant to the job you're applying for than it is to actually put that percentile, or the top whatever 5% ranking on there, because that actual ranking, it starts becoming a blur for the recruiter. But what will stand out is when you have that description there of like, hey, I'm doing something that is specific to the job. And if those other people have not done that and they just say, hey, I'm top 5%, the recruiter is going to say, I don't know exactly what that means, but you will be able to say, well, I'm kind of telling you what it means and how it's relevant to the job. So that's very important. And then the big thing as well is having the story that you want to tell ready for the interview. So hopefully you are able to stand out, and then you get to the interview stage. You're going to be asked some questions, and you're going to be there to kind of justify that you are equipped for this job. Being able to kind of talk through your thought process and how you solved one of the challenges that is relevant to the job is going to be very helpful, because then you can talk about that to the interviewer and demonstrate to them that you know your stuff. And if you're not prepared to do that during the interview, it might be a little bit more clumsy, and they might not get the feeling that you do know what you're talking about and that you are prepared. So make sure that's something that you think through. How do I want to talk about how I solved this problem? Because I want to be able to demonstrate that I can solve these types of challenges, and I've done it before. And you want to do that in a way that is prepared and not kind of like spur on the moment kind of spur of thought right there. So hopefully you all found that helpful. I'm going to go take a look in the chat for some of the questions, but I think I'm going to pass it off to the next presentation here with Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Franz. And absolutely, if anyone has any questions for Franz, go ahead and put them in the chat. And once again, we will have some open Q&A towards the end of the event, but more than likely, he's going to be hopping in there to answer your questions directly. Next, we are going to talk to Jasmine Jackson, who is not only the founder of TATP, but also an awesome member of the NCL board. Jasmine, we're so happy to have you. And whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Em. Thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone's enjoying the presentation so far. I really wish there was a scouting report when I was starting in my cyber journey over a decade ago. So my section is on passion projects, and so I'm going to explain a little bit how I use passion projects to get into cybersecurity, and also show some sites that you can use to do so as well. So, um, around 2011, I graduated with my master's in computer science, and I always knew I wanted to do cyber. So, in the early 2000s, I'm going to date myself. In the early 2000s, there was a movie called Swordfish with Hugh Jackman, John Travolta, Halle Berry, Don Cheadle. And so, Hugh Jackman was a hacker and trying to break into get money from a bank, and I was like, that's what I want to do, except for the illegal part, but the hacking, that's what I want to do. So in 2011, once I graduated, I was like, okay, I want to work in security. So I remember reaching out to recruiters, and I was like, hey, I just graduated. And at that time, certifications were really big. So I would speak with recruiters, and I'm like, hey, I'm really interested. I have the passion. And they were like, well, do you have any certs? And I'm like, no, I just graduated. So they're like, we can't help you. So I had to use pretty much go in through the side door. So what I did in 2012 was create a blog, Passion for Pen Testing, which has since changed to the Fluffy 007, which is my handle on all social media. And what I would do was solve CTF challenges. I didn't care what type of CTF challenges. I will solve it and do write-ups, because similar to what Franz was saying in the scouting report, I would use these challenges, these write-ups, as a portfolio. And so in the beginning, I really didn't get a lot of traction. And I would go on interviews, and some of the employers was like, yeah, that's great. That's a nice pastime. Go and be great. But after a while, the employers would ask, like, okay, so tell me how you solved this problem, right? Or some of the employers, before I would even enter the interview, I would put it in the application, and they would be like, oh, I checked out your blog, and this challenge, I want you to explain, like, how did you come up with the solution? I read it, but how did, like, talk through it. So as I said before, I would solve CTF challenges from Pico CTF, InfoSec Institute, pretty much any CTF, I would just solve it. And at that time, I was working as a developer. And so I will do that when I would get off work. Now, part of the passion project was, at the time, I went to my then manager, and I was like, hey, I'm interested in cybersecurity. I know the company has a cybersecurity department. Can you like help facilitate me to transition out of development to cyber? And so I had a really great manager, and he was like, yes, I will help you with that. And so what he did at work was he put me in a stretch project. And so how it originally worked was I was a volunteer in repairing a legacy Java application. So how it worked was the company hired penetration testers. The penetration testers would come, find the vulnerabilities, give the report, have a nice life. We're done. See you later. And so I would come in as a volunteer and then repair those vulnerabilities. And so I did that for a year. And so everyone was like, you're really passionate about this. You really like it. Like, we give you challenges and you do it with a smile and you always ask questions. So after a year, they were like, hey, do you want to manage this effort? And so I was like, yes. So at that time, when the penetration testers were done, they would give me the report, and then I would assemble the volunteers, help them repair the vulnerabilities. And this was before DevOps, so working with the testing manager to make sure the remediation was pushed to production or make it live, and then meet with senior management. So did that, and then I finally transferred to the cyber department, but I still was doing the CTFs and my blog on the side because I noticed that a lot of people really, so that was one thing. So one aspect of doing a passion project is actually completing CTFs. And something I want to make note with that is you might see other solutions. And I know in the beginning I wasn't intimidated because I'm like, okay, like I see like 20 solutions, like no one is going to read my solution, right? And so, but after a while, people would ask, like, hey, did you solve this challenge? Like, I really like how you break things down. I really like how you do your write-ups. Have you thought about doing this challenge? So I'm saying that to say, if you do go down the CTF route and you see additional write ups, do your write up because no one can solve a problem like you. So when I would do my CTFs, I assumed nothing about the reader. So I would break everything down, and people like that. So I was like, okay, that's great. So that's one avenue, is to use CTFs. Another avenue with social media is to use that to your advantage. So, for instance, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. I don't have a TikTok, so I really can't help in that realm. But also using social media to your advantage, because contrary to popular belief, people in the cyber space, we really are friendly people. And especially for like beginners, we really want to help and get more people in the field because we understand it's very much needed. So if you see someone on social media and you just, for instance, when Franz was using the SOC example, and you're like, I want to be a SOC analyst, and you might be on X and you see a person who's a SOC analyst and you're like, wow, I really like how they construct their tweets, or excuse me, I really like what they, tweet about. You can reach out to them, start a conversation, follow them, and then take it from there. I did that in the beginning of my career as well. When I was trying to transition into cyber, I used social media to my advantage. I wanted to see, at that time, I really wanted to do penetration testing. So I started following people who were penetration testers. And so I was like, okay, so what are they doing? Like, how are they thinking? What tools are they using? How are they attacking a problem? And that was really helpful for me to kind of get an idea of, okay, this is what they do typically. So using social media to your advantage. And then the third thing was I did open source projects. So an open source project is a project that you can contribute to. So that's through codes, documentation, and most times you're not paid, but you can use that as experience because, as Franz mentioned during the scouting report, for your resume, you want to have experience that you've done, like doing CTFs and being able to talk to it is good. If you do open source projects, that's good as well, because I actually used that in my interview when I was transitioning into the cyber department at my previous job. I had contributed to the WebGoat OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project WebGoat application. And so I spoke to that and I was like, hey, I like fixed these challenges and this is what I did. And I was able to talk to it and I was able to land the job. So open source projects is also good because you can network, right? So I won't, depending on the type of person, you might start meeting cybersecurity professionals who are really big in the open source space. And that's always good to like start making connections that way, because for instance, if they have openings at their job or if they know that you're really passionate, they can give you ideas and pointers of like, hey, this position is open, I think you should apply, or hey, if you need a recommendation, I can provide that for you because you have done this work. So I'm going to share my screen and I hope I don't mess this up. And let me okay, so I have some links here that I think is going to be put in the chat. So I'm going to start from right to left. So the first link is Juice Shop. And so this is through OWASP. And so this actually replaced WebGoat. WebGoat is an older insecure web application. So I've used Juice Shop as well. And so essentially, this is where you can find like vulnerabilities in the OWASP top 10. Some things that are really great is that the sources, GitHub, CTF extension, and then the community, such as a subreddit and Slack channel. But the thing that I really want to point to are the leaders. So if you want to, for instance, if you're like, hey, I'm interested in contributing to Juice Shop, these will be the leaders that you will reach out to and be like, hey, I am interested in, contributing to this application. Oh, and then there's also a contributors here of a team of volunteers. So I highly recommend Juice Shop. I've used it to hone in and keep my skills sharp. The next is WebGoat. So as I said before, this is like a older web insecure web application. So I used this when I was transitioning into cyber over a decade ago. Is similarly, there are leaders that you will reach out to if you want to contribute to the project. Next is Microsoft. So Microsoft has an open source section, and so they have open source projects that you can do as well. Meta has the same of like open source projects, and the good thing about Meta is that you can filter by category. So they have blockchain, data infrastructure, front end, security, and privacy. So I'm going to do security and privacy. So these are the different open source projects that are currently available to contribute to. Next is Google. And so they have projects as well. And then you can filter as well by category. And they have some on security. And so they have two here that you can contribute to. And then finally, 20 open source projects you shouldn't miss in 2025. So this, I'll be honest, I found this right before our webinar today. So I looked at the first one and I thought it was really cool because you could use it to learn various programming languages, help others, and even get testimonials. So this is good, especially if you're new to the open source space. This is really good to really get your feet wet, to dive in, and to really contribute. So I would say, just to recap, with the Passion Project, you can use CTFs and create a portfolio. You can use open source projects. And social media, or you can use, if you're working now, you can use your current position to try to transition to a cybersecurity department if it exists. So that's what I'm going to leave all of you with today. I hope this was helpful. I'll look into the comments to see if there are any questions. But again, thank you so much for having me, and I'll pass it back to M.
Let me unmute first. Sorry, but thank you so much, Jasmine. A lot of fantastic tips and information, and the links to all of the different sites that she visited are on the comments section. And of course, if you have any questions for Jasmine, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we are now going to transition to Tristan Messner. Hey, Tristan, we're going to get you all up here. There we go.
Hi,
Hi. All right. Well, I'm going to let you loose. And once again, if you all have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. When Tristan wraps up, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of Q&A. But until then, take it away.
Okay, so I'm here to talk to you all about GitHub, and that is something that I probably could spend a very long time like going through and explaining, but I'm going to do my best to focus on it in like the context of the like recruiting process. So for those that don't know, GitHub is like a social coding website, but it specifically has a bunch of different repositories that are based off of the Git version control system. Most of all of the things that you can see publicly on GitHub are various different open source projects. I know Jasmine kind of touched on like open source when it comes to doing things and like having passion projects. GitHub is a great place to host that, host your own passion projects and find various open source projects that you can then also go and commit code to or documentation and contribute to. Why does all of this matter in the context of like interviews? It is because it again gives you, the candidate, something that like stands out, and it's a way of showing experience. Especially like if you put your own projects on your GitHub, that is like something that is at least in the context of interviewing for like software devs, that is something we like look at a lot, because we can go in. We can see like, oh, not only do they say they're experienced in this language, but they have this project that they built with, I'm going to say JavaScript. So say recruiter will go in. More than likely, the technical interview people will look more at the specific like repositories that you're listing and see the code that you've done. And another good thing with GitHub, and this is just going outside of specifically contributing to open source, is GitHub has a feature called GitHub Pages, which allows you to host your own static site on GitHub for free. So if you have ever thought about wanting to like start a blog, which also can be used on your resume to show that you're active and doing things, you can use GitHub Pages and you can do it for free. And the bonus of that is like I personally don't think it's as complicated as setting up like a WordPress page, and you don't have to worry about paying for anything. It's all completely free. A common way to do that is, at least when I was doing it, there's a tool called like Jekyll, which allows you to like convert Markdown to a static site, and it ships to GitHub Pages. It's all really easy. It's a great way to publish your write-ups, share your write-ups, having projects that aren't necessarily focused entirely on just code. And as a bonus, it's free. You don't have to pay for a blogging platform. Going back more into the code, you can also use GitHub to like look for other open source projects. When you're just starting out in open source, GitHub has tagged for like new contributor friendly, because that is something that can be very intimidating, because you could go to like this massive open source project that has thousands upon thousands of lines of code, and you as a new contributor, new developer, could get very overwhelmed. focusing now more on like the security aspect of things. There are actually a lot of security tools that are rather easy to contribute to because the code bases aren't that massive. Because they're generally command line only tools. You don't have to worry about a massive, large GUI, and you can like contribute very small features to them that might be needed. I don't have much else, which I know is probably appreciated because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer questions.
No problem, Tristan. And actually, you really did open it up. So if anyone has any questions for Tristan about GitHub or anything specifically to what he was sharing about, go ahead and put it in the comments section. We do have a lot of questions, so thanks, Tristan, for putting it back to me. In a moment, we're going to go ahead and transition to some Q&A. If you have questions that we ask out loud, yay, we got to your question. If we don't get to you live, it does not mean that your question was not answered in the chat, so make sure you go ahead and check that out. In a minute, we're going to go ahead and bring all the speakers on. That way, they can just go ahead and hop in and answer the questions if it pertains to them. And some of them are actually going to be specifically for our speakers. So let's go ahead and get everybody back on stage really quick. And we will go through some of the questions that we starred, and we will pop them up on the screen. So we're going to go ahead and start with this wonderful question. So the question is, what type of technical questions are asked during cyber interviews? So if anyone would like to take that on, of course, this is not one size fits all, but this might give you some idea of kind of the technical questions that are typically asked.
So I can start. So technical questions more so, and if you're doing entry level, a lot of times recruiters want to see how you think through a problem. So first, when you do an interview, all of you should use the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And that's a neat way to put your answer. So a technical question might be, explain a time where you had to work on a project and you had no knowledge, right? So what are some steps that you did to get yourself up and running, like ramp up, and then how did you go about solving the problem, right? So in the beginning, it's more, for entry level, it's more how you solve problems. And so that should be the key takeaway of explaining that in a short, succinct way. And I'm saying that because if your interview is like an hour, about 5 minutes of introductions, 5 minutes for questions. So now you're down to about 50 minutes. And with the back and forth, you just want to make sure you have enough time and frame your answers in a way that you can clearly convey what you want to say.
I'll add to that because I do our hiring for our cyber roles. So the one bit of advice I would give is always just keep in mind that there is no definitive answer to anything to do with the hiring process, because, you know, every place is going to do it slightly differently. So always just keep that in mind. And generally, at least for when we are doing our hiring, the way that we do it is like it's like an hour session, and then we have one kind of like critical thinking question and one kind of technical question. And so the goals for the critical thinking question is just to understand your thought process, kind of exactly as Jasmine kind of laid out with the STAR process. Like, are you able to kind of tackle a problem that might be very big? And obviously you're not going to solve it in the short amount of time that you have. But can you at least kind of like break it down into smaller pieces and kind of demonstrate that like you do have the general thought process to be able to tackle those problems? Because what employers are really looking for is someone who is going to be adaptable, someone who's going to be able to deal with things that they haven't seen before. And so they're going to want to ask some questions to identify, can you do something like that, right? So if I give you a question that isn't something that you would have like seen in class before, can you like not panic, and can you kind of come up with the game plan for like how would you go about solving it? Then we actually have the technical question that we do, where this is like, I see this vary a lot with different companies. Some companies just ask kind of like more knowledge-based questions, where they kind of ask like, okay, what would you do in this situation? Like what commands would you run, or like what, like what tools would you use? But we ask a little bit more of like actual like hands-on keyboard questions where we actually do like a, hey, let's do a screen share. And like, can you show me like how to solve this problem, right? Generally speaking, the bigger companies will typically have more of like a generic technical interview process. And then the more kind of like the smaller, like mid-sized companies, and also like a lot of Silicon Valley companies will focus a lot more on having like a technical exercise where it's not just like talk me through the solution, but actually like go and do it and show me. And especially if any of you all are looking at any like software related roles, you're going to see a lot of companies who are doing like hiring assessments that are like coding challenges and coding interviews, either where you're doing the coding kind of offline or you're doing a screen share live. So yeah, that's just something to kind of be mentally prepared for. But also keep in mind, I'm giving you this advice from my perspective, and a lot of companies are probably going to do things differently as well.
Terrific. Thank you both. And the next question is kind of aligned to what you all were talking about, but a little bit more specific. And I think this question probably relates to a lot of people. How do you recommend choosing a path in cyber when a lot of recruiters often want more generalists for entry-level positions?
I can take this out. I'll go first. So I know for me, when I was starting out, that social media was a good research point for me. So when I mentioned a little bit during my passion projects where I had an idea I wanted to do penetration testing and I started following people who were penetration testers, I really started immersing myself in that field and I was able to use that to kind of pinpoint. So I always tell people, especially when you're starting out in cyber, try like pick your top 3 categories that you're like, hey, I think this is what I want to do, and research and figure out, okay, is this something that I can see myself doing? And even like, for instance, if my penetration testing, if I'm like, I wanted to pivot, that's okay, right? It's just, you just want to land or you just want to test something out and do that. But I would say in the beginning, it's pretty much you have to kind of figure out what you want to do, get a taste of it, a flavor of it, and see if you're like, okay, I can see myself doing this for the rest of my days. And if not, pivot and then talking with someone else. But I would say research and talking with people will really help with that, right? Because you might have an idea of how a position is, but then once you get into industry, it's something totally different. So that's where communication and research comes in.
To add on what Jasmine said, it's honestly good to start in a generalist position, because especially if you don't know what you want to do, because like in theory, if they want a generalist, you're going to be doing a lot of different things. And if you don't quite know exactly where you want to end up, you're going to get experience doing a bunch of different things. And then when you're on the job, you can figure out, oh, I actually really like doing this particular thing, be it maybe you really like doing like SOC analyst stuff, maybe you like doing forensics. You can kind of figure that out in a generalist role. That's why a lot of entry-level roles tend to be a bit more generalist as well, is because a lot of people in the entry level might not know exactly what they want to do.
And yeah, to build on that further, make sure that you're kind of like setting your expectations appropriately, because I know there are a lot of people who are like, ooh, I want to go be a pen tester. And then they start looking for entry-level pen testing positions. And there are not very many entry-level pen testing positions, right? Like that might be a career goal that you aspire to. But for a lot of pen testing positions, they do require a lot of existing experience. And I've seen a lot of people have a lot of frustration, saying like, okay, well, I went to school for cybersecurity. I want to be a pen tester. They apply to a lot of pen testing positions and then they don't get it. And it's very demoralizing. Like make sure that you are kind of like thinking through like what is going to be your short-term and your long-term goal, right? And, there are some people who like a little bit of it is chance and luck. Like, you're applying for a job with hundreds of other people. Sometimes the difference between you getting the job versus not getting the job is just like, did you happen to catch the eye of the recruiter that one time? Typically what you might want to be doing is like, going for maybe one of those more generalist jobs. I know a lot of people who like go into like IT and then build up little bit more experience, and then they can go into cyber. Sometimes getting straight into cyber is very difficult for people. And it also depends a lot on like, where did you go to school? We try to really promote skills-based hiring and promoting, hiring people who can do the work. But it's still kind of the reality that a lot of times recruiters and a lot of companies, when they're hiring, if they're hiring for a pen testing role in particular, they might say, okay, we're looking for this many years of experience or a 4-year degree. So if you went to community college, that might not be a viable option for you because just not enough employers are looking for people who have an associate's degree. And so, definitely figure out what you're passionate in doing, but then also kind of like plot out a roadmap there to kind of, balance out the practicality of like, when you graduate, you need to get a job. And it might be better to get a job that kind of just gets your foot in the door a little bit and then kind of work your way up there rather than trying to just go straight to your end destination and then running into a lot of difficulties with getting there. So it's probably not something that a lot of people want to hear, but it's, something that I think is important to consider so that you don't kind of get yourself very frustrated when you get a lot of no's when you're trying to kind of get your dream job right after school.
Awesome advice from everybody. So yeah, soak that in, take it in. That's definitely going to allow you to create a path and to aspire to different levels of different cyber roles. Thank you guys for that. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. There's actually 2 questions that are very similar, but I want to read them both out loud because I think they kind of just go like bookend together. So the first part of the question is, where can we find open source projects that are easy to get into as beginners? Do they need to be security focused? And then I'm going to go ahead and actually slap this one up because it like goes hand in hand. What are some kind of entry-level open source topics or issues that should be approachable by a novice? A lot that I look into seem quite complex in regards to my experience or what I've learned so far.
Personally, how I would go about doing it is, and it's going to be different for like every person because everyone has slightly different experiences and what they know. Ask yourself what you're good at and you enjoy. And then think of some tools you have used and look at those tools. And if that is too intimidating, you can like just go on GitHub and like search for words relating to the topic, find something that has like a couple of issues on it and make small contributions. And even if like code is too scary or not something you'd want to do, you can just start with documentation. You also do not necessarily need open source experience in a security related role. However, it helps. It's going to be a lot more relevant if your job is going to be something where you're doing more like programming type things.
Also, I added there's 2 excuse me. I provided 2 links for beginners. So first, for the open source project, it doesn't have to be security focused. So it's just pretty much anything that you want to do. And then the second is, I think with the second question, it's just finding something that resonates with you. Like when I did WebGold, it was because I used WebGold when I was in the beginning stages of my cybersecurity career. And so when I wanted to do an open source project and I saw they were looking for volunteers, that just made the most sense because I had used the application, right? So it's more so finding something that resonates with you. Also, you can go beginner open source projects. There's a ton of them. And then just use that. And no, it doesn't have to be security focused. I also would advocate for documentation because I know, speaking for myself, I am extremely bad now with and if you come and do an open source project and you're like, hey, I will do documentation, they will love you, right? Because that, unfortunately, that's the important thing. But a lot of times it's missed, especially when people are focused on the implementation and fingers on keyboard. You're like, poof, that's done. Move on to the next. And then it's like, what about documentation? And it's like, what about it, right? We'll get to it at some point. So they're like, hey, I can help with documentation. to get your feet as your entry point, they will love you. And then you can use that to build upon where you want to go next.
All right, the next question is short and sweet. What about GitLab? What about it?
Take whatever I said about GitHub and just replace GitHub with GitLab. They're effectively one and one the same. It's just what flavor do you like? GitHub is a lot more recognized, but GitLab isn't unrecognized by any means.
Okay, short and sweet. I like that. All right, the next question. Laura Vega, you're very popular in these questions, but you have excellent questions. So the next question is, how do we better frame school projects that may not have been the best to still attract the attention to the performance rather than the quality? A lot of the projects I've done for front end are a little bare bones because of the requirements of the class. So it's kind of like recycling the work that you've done. How do you present it in the best way?
If this was me, I would focus on what you learned, right? So I will talk about the class, the project that you did in class, but I will talk about the skills you learned, right? So even though it's bare bones, it might be I'm just going to use an example, Angular, right? So going to the JavaScript that Tristan was saying, it's like, hey, for this project, I had to use Angular. I had to learn these things. I will focus more so on what you learned and how it can be applied. Also, I want to say, especially if you're coming out of school, employers should know that you might not have a lot of experience, even though sometimes you do see entry level positions and they're like 5 years experience. And I'm like, that's not entry level, but that's a conversation for another day. So most recruiters know you're not going to really have a lot of experience, and they know that you're going to use like classroom projects to talk to things that you've done. So it's more so talking about the project and then what you learn through the project, and it's being able to convey that, right? Being able to tell that in a short story and have the interviewer or the recruiter follow the path of like how you got from point A to point Z.
I'll add to kind of what Jasmine mentioned there, because I'm not sure about the specific context in which you're referring to a school project. If it's something that you're talking about in an interview, I think Jasmine kind of covered that a lot. But if it's related to the GitHub with the previous question, if you're going to have your code on your GitHub and it's going to be public and that's going to be something you're promoting on your resume and what have you, please go through and just make sure that you didn't put any kind of jokes in there. Because I know a lot of people, especially in college, they got a lot of late nights, they leave some silly comments in there, then that might be something that people can see. So just be very cognizant of that. And then also keep in mind that typically if someone's looking through that, they are not actually going to be like running your code, right? So like it might not even work and they would have absolutely no clue. But what they are going to be doing is kind of like looking at like how you're writing the code. Does it look understandable? Is it really messy? Like, can they kind of understand what you're doing? And they're going to be making judgment calls based on that. So you could have like, if you're open sourcing one of your school projects and having that as part of your portfolio, just make sure you go through that and just like go and clean it up, right? Like if you were doing some shortcuts just to get it to work so that you could turn in your project, go back and like clean it up and do it the right way. Because I've seen quite a few people who've like put their GitHub on their resume, and then I'll go look at their GitHub and I'm like, ooh, this, like, I hope they're not actually like normally writing the code this way, because a lot of it looks kind of like all over the place. So, putting your GitHub on your resume doesn't just automatically help you out. It can actually harm you. And if you're doing something like open sourcing your school project, that's something that you definitely want to go back and reevaluate. And even if it doesn't run, or even if the functionality is limited, they don't know that because they're not actually going to run it. So in terms of like, it might not be as impressive as you might want it to be. That's okay, as long as the code that you have looks professional. And so highly recommend, if you haven't done this in school, using things like ESLint, like linting tools, which kind of like helps you kind of identify like conformity to style guides. definitely at the minimum do that so that you can make sure that you're presenting your project in a very positive light.
Thank you both. And we are going to go ahead and wrap up with one last question. You're going to have to dig real deep and think about yesteryear. Excellent question. From your perspective, what would you do over again if you were starting off in cybersecurity?
I'll take this one. I would network more. So for me in the beginning, I really didn't network. And so that was something I had to learn when I was getting a lot of rejections from recruiters. So something that I did was I started attending cybersecurity meetups. So meetup.com is a great way to meet people in your city or your town. And so I filtered it to I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. So there was a OWASP Charlotte chapter at the time. So I went there, started talking with people, and it's really good because recruiters, depending on the meetup, recruiters will be there. So definitely check that out. So for me, it will be definitely networking more because the cybersecurity field is a small field. Once you get in, you'll start seeing the same people over and over again at conferences and different things. So I always tell people who are starting out, network, network, network. That will be a key factor.
Absolutely. Tristan, Franz, any insight, recommendations of what you would have done?
I would double down on what Jasmine was saying. I mentioned this earlier before, right? But the really painful part about trying to get a job in cybersecurity, especially if you're breaking in, is the fact that if you don't know people, you haven't met people, and you're going to apply on like Indeed or LinkedIn, it is a really bad numbers game for you. Just being very brutally honest about it. Like when we put up a job opening, we will easily get like 500 some applicants, right? So just think about kind of like the odds that you have in a generic, like, you know, like assuming everyone is qualified, right? Maybe we can interview 5 people out of that 500. So there's like a 1% chance that you even get the interview. And then you have to multiply that by, you know, like, so for you to actually have feasible odds, you have to apply to like a lot of jobs just to get an interview, let alone the actual job itself. Versus if you actually know someone, they put in a good word for you, you kind of like skip the line in a lot of the filtering. And the big thing I kind of say is you want to convert yourself from like a piece of paper into an actual person. And when you apply for jobs online, you are a piece of paper. There's no kind of connection. They don't have any good sense of who you are, or have a good fit you are. And if you just like know someone at that company, and even if they don't have to vouch for you, even if they say, hey, so-and-so is interested, like I met them at this thing, you know, might be worth taking a look at them. They don't even have to like vouch for you. They could just say, I know this person exists. That alone gives you more consideration than anything you could put on your resume, because like if it's in the resume, you are now one of the 500 people that's getting filtered in just several seconds, versus, you know, if the recruiter's like, wow, I actually like, this is actually someone that stands out in some way, even if they're not even vouching for you, that's super beneficial. So like, don't even feel like you need to be like super close friends to anyone. Like you could just like meet people and be like, hey, I'm interested in a job. Like, you know, who should I talk to? Who's the recruiter there? And if they can just like send an email or something like that, they don't even have to recommend you. That goes a long way. And yeah, I would definitely recommend that for anyone starting out.
And can I add, I've seen people who've done cold calls. So that's where back in the day, you would actually just call people and be like, hey, I have the service. People will do that on like LinkedIn. They've reached out to hiring managers. In the beginning, I was very intimidated to do that, reach out to people I didn't know. I mean, it depends on the person. And I mean, the odds, it can vary, but I've seen some people have some luck with that, where going to Fran's example of like you apply and this job, there's 500 applicants, right? I've seen people apply and then reach out to the hiring manager like, hey, I applied for this job. Like, hi, I'm Jasmine Jackson. I applied for this job. And some people, it's been success where a hiring manager would then go to their LinkedIn profile. And if they liked what they saw, then they'll be like, okay, put this person, I want to speak to them, like move them to the next round.
Thank you. And if y'all haven't noticed, that was called a full circle moment, because that's really exactly how you stand out. So like all the wonderful things that Franz, Jasmine, and Tristan shared today are great. They will give you a leg up in many instances. But truly, it's who you know, getting yourself out there, taking the risk of putting yourself out there really is going to make you stand out. So thank you all. I'm going to go ahead before we head off. Talk a little bit about a couple more of our Spirit Week events. We hope that you've been enjoying these events all week long. We have 2 more events to go. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, we have a chat with the game creators session. You will see Tristan there. We also have a really awesome person from CrowdStrike who's going to be joining us. Go ahead and register even if you're not able to join live, so you can go ahead and get that rewatch link. And then on Friday, May 2nd, we are going to have the award ceremony at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be announcing the top winners for individual and team game, and we'd love to have you join us. And once again, I want to just thank everybody on this panel. We really appreciate all of your awesome insight, and we appreciate all of you joining us, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow at Chat with the Game Creators. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.